Her fist slammed the door at 9:47 a.m. Burnt coffee clawed the air. Best gift? Mom dying. 27 years, $400,000 paid. Answered with a plan to declare me incompetent. I opened the folder, $320,000 proof, while Mrs. Patterson watched. Then Julia saw the one document she never expected. For 27 years, I kept a secret that could have destroyed my relationship with my daughter. It wasn't an affair or a crime. It was something much simpler and, at the same time, much more powerful. I had $320,000 hidden away in investment accounts that Julia never knew existed. Money I'd saved penny by penny from my teacher's salary, skipping meals and wearing the same clothes for years while I poured everything into her dreams. And today, standing in my Atlanta kitchen with burnt coffee filling the air and my daughter's cruel laughter echoing from her bedroom, I decided the secret was over. It was time for everyone to know who I really was. More importantly, it was time for Julia to discover who she really was without me. The words that changed everything came through her bedroom door like a knife through paper. The best birthday present would be my mom dying soon. I'd inherit everything and stop getting her constant guilt trips about attention. The laughter that followed wasn't the innocent giggle of my little girl. It was the calculated amusement of a stranger who had been wearing my daughter's face for years. I'm Lucia Henderson. I'm 66 years old, and until that October morning, I believed love and sacrifice were enough to build a family. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was about to become very right about what my daughter needed most. Let me tell you something about sacrifice that I wish I'd understood earlier. When you give everything to someone, you don't make them grateful. You make them entitled. When you remove every obstacle from their path, you don't make them strong. You make them weak. And when you love someone more than they love themselves, you don't make them better. You make them dependent on your pain. I'm so grateful you're here listening to my story. You know, when I decided to share this, I wasn't sure anyone would understand why a mother would do what I did. If you've ever felt taken for granted by family, or if you know someone who needs to hear that it's possible to set boundaries even with the people we love most, please hit that like button. While I tell you the rest, if you could subscribe to the channel, it would help me reach more people who might need to hear this message. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? I want to know how far these stories of courage are traveling. Now let me tell you exactly what happened when I heard those words that shattered 27 years of illusion. The coffee burned on the stove while my world burned around me. Through the thin walls of our suburban home, I could hear Julia's voice getting animated as she continued her conversation. Seriously, Mom acts like her sacrifices are some kind of gift, but they're really just emotional blackmail. Look how much I gave up for you, Julia. Look how hard I work, Julia. It's exhausting. Sometimes I think she enjoys being the martyr. Each word felt like acid poured directly onto an open wound. This was my only child, the girl I'd rocked through fevers and celebrated through graduations, the young woman I'd worked double shifts to support through pre-med courses at Emory University, the daughter who cost me $4,500 every single month just in tuition, not counting rent, car payments, health insurance, credit cards, and the endless stream of emergencies that always seemed to require my immediate financial intervention. My hands began to shake as the mathematical reality crystallized in my mind. I pulled out my phone and opened the calculator app, standing there in my kitchen with coffee burning and my heart breaking, adding up 27 years of unconditional financial support. College tuition, $4,500 x 12 x 4 were $216,000. Apartment rent, $1,200 x 12 x 6 were $86,400 car payments. $450 x 12 x 5 were $27,000 health insurance. $300 x 12 x 6, $21,600 credit card payments. $200 x 12 x 6 were $14,400 cell phone. $80 x 12 x 10 were $9,600 emergency loans. Conservative estimate, $25,000. Total, $400,000. Nearly $500,000. More than most people see in a lifetime, handed over willingly by a retired teacher whose starting salary had been $28,000 a year and whose current pension was $2,800 monthly. The laughter from her room pierced the silence again. And get this, she actually thinks I'm going to take care of her when she's old. Like, hello, I have my own life to live. I didn't ask to be born. Something fundamental shifted inside my chest. Not broke. That would suggest it could be repaired. This was more like a controlled demolition, where the old structure is carefully destroyed to make room for something entirely new. The mother who had spent decades shrinking herself to make room for Julia's selfishness was being permanently retired. What emerged in her place was someone I barely recognized, but instantly respected. I turned off the stove with hands that were no longer trembling, opened my laptop with movements that felt deliberate and precise, and began the systematic dismantling of everything I had built for someone who saw my love as nothing more than financial obligation. Bank of America, student account, closed Emory University, automatic payment, canceled apartment rental guarantee, removed car insurance policy, transferred to her name only health insurance dependent coverage, terminated credit card authorized user status, revoked cell phone family plan, line disconnected. Each click felt like shedding skin. Each cancellation felt like reclaiming breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for decades. When Julia discovered what I'd done, she would learn something about me that she clearly hadn't understood despite living in my house for 24 years. I wasn't just her mother. I was a woman who had worked her way through college while pregnant and abandoned. A woman who had built a career in public education despite starting with nothing. A woman who had accumulated $320,000 in investments through discipline and intelligence while appearing to live paycheck to paycheck. A woman who had chosen to support her daughter's dreams, but who was equally capable of supporting her own priorities. The sound of Julia's bedroom door opening interrupted my financial house cleaning. Her footsteps approached the kitchen, and I could hear her still talking on the phone. I gotta go deal with the guilt machine. Mom's probably burning something again, and will somehow make it my fault for not helping. She appeared in the doorway wearing a $200 outfit I'd purchased, holding an iPhone I paid for, her hair and nails professionally done with money from the credit card I funded. The disconnect between her appearance and her gratitude was so profound, it would have been comical if it weren't so tragic. "Mom, what's that smell? Are you trying to burn the house down?" She barely glanced at me, her attention still divided between her phone call and whatever crisis she was manufacturing in her head. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in years. When had she become this person? When had I become someone whose value existed solely in the dollars I could provide? When had we both forgotten that I was a human being with worth beyond my willingness to pay for her comfort? "Julia," I said quietly, my voice carrying a tone she'd never heard before. "We need to talk." She sighed dramatically, the same performance she'd been giving me since age 15 whenever I dared to interrupt her plans with my presence. "Can it wait? I'm on an important call." "More important than your relationship with your mother?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke from the burned coffee. For just a moment, I saw confusion flicker across her face. This wasn't the script we usually followed. Normally, I would apologize for bothering her, clean up whatever mess had accumulated, and fade back into the background of her life until the next time she needed my financial intervention. But that woman was gone. In her place stood someone who had just realized that the greatest gift she could give her daughter wasn't more money. It was the chance to discover her own strength, the chance to learn the value of work, the satisfaction of independence, and the pride that comes from building something with your own hands. "Julia," I repeated, closing my laptop and giving her my full attention. "I said we need to talk, and I mean now." The conversation that destroyed my illusions didn't end with that first cruel sentence. As Julia reluctantly hung up her phone and slouched against my kitchen doorframe with the practiced indifference of someone who had never questioned where her comfort came from, I realized I needed to hear the complete truth. Not just the fragments that had accidentally escaped through her bedroom door, but the full scope of how my only child really saw me. "Actually, Julia, before we talk, I need to use the bathroom. Give me just 1 minute." I moved toward the hallway, but instead of entering the bathroom, I pressed myself against the wall just outside her room where her phone was still buzzing with incoming calls. She answered immediately, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a whisper, but carried clearly through the thin walls of our 1970s suburban home. "Sorry, false alarm." The guilt machine wanted to have a talk, but I told her I was busy. You know how she gets when she feels ignored. My stomach clenched as I recognized the voice on the other end. Sarah, her roommate from last semester, someone I'd helped financially when her own family had cut her off. Someone who had eaten at my table and accepted my generosity while apparently serving as Julia's primary confidant in planning my emotional destruction. I swear, Sarah, living here is like being trapped with the emotional vampire. She's always hovering, always asking about my day, always wanting to bond over some stupid TV show or cooking project. Doesn't she understand I'm 24 years old? I don't need a mommy anymore. I need a bank account. The casual cruelty in her voice hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't teenage rebellion or temporary selfishness. This was calculated indifference toward someone who had reorganized her entire existence around Julia's needs. Someone who had worked summer jobs through retirement to afford her daughter's private education. Someone who had delayed her own health care to keep Julia's credit cards active. And the worst part, Julia continued, warming to her subject like a prosecutor presenting evidence, is how she acts like her sacrifices make her some kind of saint. Like, Mom, you chose to have a kid. I didn't sign a contract agreeing to be grateful for basic parental responsibilities. Basic parental responsibilities. I pressed my back harder against the wall, feeling something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Apparently $400,000 in support beyond age 18 qualified as basic responsibilities in Julia's accounting system. Oh, and get this, she continued with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. She actually keeps these little notebooks where she tracks every dollar she spends on me, like some kind of emotional accountant. Last week, I saw one sitting on her desk with entries going back years. Julia's textbooks, $400. Julia's car repair, $300. It's so pathetic. If you're going to give someone money, just give it. Don't keep a running tally like you expect a thank you parade. The notebooks. She had seen my financial records and interpreted them as evidence of manipulation rather than careful budgeting by someone living on a fixed income. Those same notebooks that showed me skipping meals to afford her sorority dues. Those same notebooks that documented me choosing generic medications over brand names so I could maintain her health insurance. Honestly, sometimes I think about what would happen if she just wasn't around anymore. I know that sounds terrible, but hear me out. I'd inherit this house, which is worth at least $200,000 now, plus whatever savings she has, which has to be something since she's always acting broke but somehow manages to cover my expenses. I could sell everything, pay off my student loans, and actually start my life without having to pretend I'm grateful for every little thing. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop 20 degrees. My daughter wasn't just ungrateful. She was actively fantasizing about my death as a solution to her financial independence. She had calculated the value of my absence and found it preferable to the burden of my presence. The only problem, Julia continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone solving a particularly challenging puzzle, is that she's disgustingly healthy for someone her age. Good genes, I guess. She'll probably live to 90 just to spite me. By then, I'll be too old to enjoy the freedom. Sarah's voice came through more clearly now, tinged with what sounded like genuine concern. Julia, that's really harsh. Even for you. She's your mom. Sarah, you don't understand because your parents actually prepared you for the real world. My mom prepared me for dependency. Every problem I've ever had, she's solved with money. Every challenge I've faced, she's removed with her checkbook. I'm 24 years old, and I don't know how to pay a utility bill because she's always handled everything. She didn't raise a daughter. She raised a pet. The words hit their target with surgical precision. A pet. Someone whose entire value existed in providing comfort and convenience for her owner. Someone whose needs were secondary to the owner's desire to feel needed. Someone whose death would be mourning briefly before moving on to the practical benefits of inheritance. I heard her bedroom door open and footsteps moving toward the kitchen. Quickly, I slipped into the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me had the same gray hair I'd been wearing, the same laugh lines around her eyes, the same hands scarred from decades of cooking and cleaning. But something fundamental had changed in her expression. The desperate eagerness to please was gone. The anxious concern about Julia's approval had vanished. In their place was something I hadn't seen in my own face for 27 years. Self-respect. When I emerged from the bathroom, Julia was standing in the kitchen, examining the evidence of my morning's work. My laptop was still open, showing the last bank account I'd closed. Her credit card lay on the counter where I'd cut it into precise pieces. The printouts of canceled automatic payments were scattered across the table like evidence from a crime scene. Her face went through a remarkable transformation. Confusion gave way to understanding, which gave way to disbelief, which finally settled into the kind of panic that comes when someone realizes their safety net has just been removed without warning. "Mom," she said slowly, her voice losing all traces of the casual cruelty I'd overheard moments before. "What is this?" I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped her with homework, celebrated her acceptances, and listened to her complaints about professors who didn't appreciate her brilliance. The same table where I'd eaten thousands of meals alone while she pursued her social life with my financial support. "This," I said calmly, gesturing to the scattered papers, "is what happens when a pet decides to become a person." Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. For the first time in years, Julia was experiencing something completely unfamiliar. A problem that couldn't be solved by asking me for money. "I heard your conversation, Julia, all of it. And I want to thank you for finally being honest about how you see our relationship. It's clarified things considerably." The color drained from her face like water from a broken sink. "Mom, you don't understand. I was just venting." "I didn't mean—" "You meant every word," I interrupted, with a gentleness that seemed to frighten her more than anger would have. "And you were right about several things. I did make you dependent. I did solve your problems with money instead of teaching you to solve them yourself. I did raise a pet instead of a daughter." I stood up and moved to the kitchen window, looking out at the neighborhood where I'd lived for 15 years, the neighborhood where I'd planned to spend my remaining years watching grandchildren play in the same yard where Julia had once built sandcastles and caught fireflies. But pets can be trained, Julia. And the first lesson is learning that love isn't the same thing as a bank account. The silence that followed my words stretched between us like a chasm that 27 years of enabling had created. Julia stood frozen in my kitchen, her mouth opening and closing like someone trying to breathe underwater. The woman who had just moments ago been casually discussing the benefits of my death was now confronting the reality that her financial lifeline had been severed with surgical precision. "Mom, please," she finally whispered, her voice cracking in a way I hadn't heard since she was 7 years old and had broken my favorite vase. "You can't be serious about this. I have tuition due next week. My rent is due in 3 days. My car payment?" "Your car payment," I interrupted with the same calm tone I'd once used to explain multiplication tables, "is now your responsibility, along with every other expense you've been taking for granted." I watched her face cycle through the 5 stages of grief in fast forward. Denial flickered in her eyes as she shook her head. Anger flashed as her hands clenched into fists. Bargaining emerged as she opened her mouth to negotiate. Depression settled over her features as she realized the scope of her situation. But acceptance? That was going to take much longer. "But I don't know how to do any of this," she said. And for the first time in years, I heard genuine vulnerability in her voice instead of manipulative pleading. "I don't know how to pay bills or manage money or—" "Then you'll learn," I said simply. "The same way I learned when I was 16, pregnant and abandoned by your father. The same way millions of people learn every day, through necessity." Over the next 3 days, I implemented what I privately called Project Independence, with the systematic thoroughness that had once made me an effective high school mathematics teacher. If Julia was going to be forced into adulthood, I was going to ensure she had no escape routes back to dependency. First, I contacted David Morrison, an estate planning attorney I'd known since college. David had watched me struggle as a single mother and had always expressed admiration for what I'd accomplished on a teacher's salary. When I explained the situation, his response was immediate and supportive. "Lucia, I've been wondering when you were going to stop enabling her," he said during our Tuesday morning meeting in his downtown Atlanta office. "I've seen this pattern before. Children who never learn to value what they have because they never risk losing it." David helped me restructure my financial accounts to ensure Julia couldn't claim any form of dependency or financial hardship that might legally obligate me to continue supporting her. We established clear documentation that she was an adult who had been receiving voluntary support that was now being withdrawn. The key, David explained while reviewing the papers, is to ensure this doesn't look like punishment or abandonment. This is a parent making a conscious decision to transition an adult child to independence. Completely legal and, frankly, long overdue. Bomba 1. The hidden truth about Julia's expenses. But it was during my Thursday meeting with my accountant, Margaret Chen, that I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Margaret had been helping me organize my financial records when she noticed discrepancies in Julia's spending patterns that I had somehow missed. "Lucia," Margaret said, her voice carefully controlled as she spread credit card statements across her desk. "I need to ask you about some of these charges. Are you aware that Julia has been using your credit cards for expenses that have nothing to do with education or basic living costs?" She pointed to line items that made my stomach lurch. $2,400 at a luxury spa in Buckhead. $1,800 for a weekend trip to Miami that I'd never heard about. $3,200 for designer handbags and jewelry. $500 for restaurant bills that exceeded my monthly grocery budget. These charges, Margaret continued, suggest that Julia has been treating your financial support as discretionary income rather than survival assistance. The total for non-essential expenses over the past year alone is $47,000. $47,000. Nearly twice my annual pension, spent on luxuries while I had been buying generic groceries and skipping medical checkups to ensure I could cover her basic needs. The mathematical reality hit me like a slap. Julia hadn't just been ungrateful for my sacrifices. She had been actively exploiting them. Every dollar I'd saved by choosing store-brand medication over name brand had gone toward funding a lifestyle that was more extravagant than anything I'd ever allowed myself. Bomba 2. The social media revelation. That evening, Margaret's discovery led me to do something I'd never done before: investigate Julia's social media presence. What I found there was like discovering that the daughter I thought I knew had been living a completely fabricated life. Her Instagram account, which I'd never seen, painted the picture of a privileged young woman living what she called her best life. Photos of expensive dinners with captions like, "treating myself because I deserve it." Pictures from luxury hotels with hashtags about living authentically. Videos of shopping sprees with comments about investing in quality pieces. But the post that destroyed me was from 3 weeks ago. A picture of Julia holding champagne at what appeared to be an expensive rooftop restaurant, with the caption, "Celebrating another month of financial freedom." When you have parents who understand that supporting your dreams means supporting your lifestyle. Blessed, Andrens, spoiled, living my best life. The comments from her friends were even worse. "Your mom is literally goals. Wish mine understood that money is meant to be spent. Living the dream while the rest of us work minimum wage jobs. Can your mom adopt me?" Julia had turned my sacrifices into social media content. My financial support wasn't seen as parental love. It was seen as evidence of her superior manipulation skills. She had been displaying my generosity like a trophy while privately discussing my death as an inheritance opportunity. Bomba 3. The discovery of the backup plan. But the worst revelation came on Friday when my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on my door with information that made everything else pale in comparison. "Lucia, honey," she said, her voice heavy with concern. "I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but after what happened with Julia this week, I think you need to know." Mrs. Patterson, who had lived next door for 8 years and had always been fond of Julia, explained that she had overheard a conversation in my backyard 2 weeks earlier. Julia had been on the phone with someone, discussing what she called her backup plan. She was talking about how if you ever cut her off financially, she had already researched the legal requirements for claiming you were mentally incompetent, Mrs. Patterson said, her elderly hands trembling as she spoke. She said she had been documenting instances of what she called your erratic behavior, and that she could probably get power of attorney if needed. The air left my lungs completely. Julia hadn't just been planning for my natural death. She had been preparing to have me declared mentally unfit so she could control my assets while I was still alive. The daughter I had raised with infinite patience and unconditional support had been researching ways to legally steal my independence. She mentioned having conversations with some kind of lawyer about elder abuse claims, Mrs. Patterson continued. Something about how controlling parents who use money to manipulate their children could be seen as showing signs of dementia or financial irresponsibility. The irony was so twisted, it was almost beautiful. Julia had been planning to use my generosity as evidence of my incompetence. Every dollar I'd given her could be reframed as proof that I was incapable of making sound financial decisions. Every sacrifice I'd made for her comfort could be presented as evidence of my diminished mental capacity. When Mrs. Patterson left, I sat in my living room for an hour, staring at the family photos that covered my mantel. Pictures of Julia's graduation from high school, her acceptance to college, birthday celebrations, Christmas mornings. In every single photo, she was smiling. But now I understood that those smiles had been performances, designed to maintain the financial relationship that she saw as her primary inheritance strategy. That night, I called David Morrison at home. David, I need to ask you about something. If an adult child wanted to claim their parent was mentally incompetent, what would they need to prove? His silence on the other end of the line lasted so long, I thought the call had dropped. Finally, he spoke, his voice careful and professional. Lucia, has Julia threatened you with something like that? Not directly, but I have reason to believe she's been considering it as an option. In that case, David said, we need to take some immediate precautions. I'm going to arrange for you to undergo a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation with Dr. Sarah Williams, one of the most respected geriatric psychiatrists in the state. We need documented proof of your mental competency that's recent and thorough enough to withstand any legal challenge. Is that really necessary? Lucia, if Julia has been researching elder abuse claims, she's playing for keeps. We need to be prepared for the possibility that this isn't just about cutting off financial support. This might be about protecting your fundamental rights as an independent adult. The weekend that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Julia had been calling and texting constantly, alternating between rage, pleading, and threats. Her messages ran the gamut from, "You're destroying my life," to, "I'll never forgive you for this," to "Maybe we can work out a payment plan." But it was her Sunday night text that showed me exactly how far she was willing to go. Mom, I've been talking to some people about your recent behavior. Cutting off your daughter's support without warning could be seen as a sign of serious mental decline. I'm worried about you, and I think we should talk to a professional together. She was activating her backup plan. My own daughter was preparing to wage psychological warfare against me, using my love for her as ammunition. The same love that had motivated me to work double shifts was now being weaponized as evidence that I was unfit to make my own decisions. That's when I realized this wasn't just about teaching Julia independence. This was about protecting myself from someone who saw me as an obstacle to her financial freedom, rather than as the person who had made that freedom possible. Monday morning, I implemented the final phase of Project Independence. I had my locks changed. I updated my will to reflect my new understanding of Julia's character. I arranged for all my financial statements to be sent to David's office instead of my home address. And I scheduled the psychiatric evaluation that would provide legal protection against any future competency challenges. But most importantly, I wrote a letter that I intended to give Julia when she inevitably appeared at my door demanding answers. A letter that would explain exactly why a mother who had spent 27 years saying yes was finally learning to say no. The letter began, "Dear Julia, this is not punishment. This is the graduation present you never knew you needed. Today, you begin the journey from entitled child to independent adult. It starts with learning that love isn't the same thing as money, and it ends with discovering that you're stronger than you ever realized." As I sealed the envelope, I could hear my phone buzzing with another series of increasingly desperate messages from my daughter. But for the first time in decades, I didn't rush to answer them. Instead, I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee that wasn't burned, and planned the rest of my life, a life that would finally include space for my own dreams instead of just funding someone else's. The woman who had raised a pet was gone. The woman who would teach a daughter how to become an adult was just getting started. The confrontation I had been preparing for arrived on Tuesday morning at exactly 9:47 a.m., announced by the sound of Julia's fist pounding against my newly changed locks, with the fury of someone who had just discovered that their safety net had been permanently removed. "Mom, open this door right now." Her voice carried across my quiet suburban neighborhood with the kind of desperation that draws curtains back from windows. "I know you're in there. We need to talk." I sat in my living room, calmly finishing my coffee while listening to my daughter's public meltdown. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Patterson discreetly positioned on her front porch, clearly prepared to serve as a witness to whatever was about to unfold. David Morrison had suggested that any major interaction with Julia should be documented, and I had taken his advice seriously. After 5 minutes of increasingly hysterical pounding, I opened the door to find Julia flanked by two people I didn't recognize. A woman in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase, and a man with a clipboard who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Finally," Julia said, pushing past me into my own living room without invitation. "Mom, these are my advocates. This is Ms. Rebecca Walsh from Eldercare Legal Services, and this is Dr. Martin Stevens, a licensed social worker who specializes in cognitive assessments." The audacity was breathtaking. My daughter had brought a legal team to my home to implement her backup plan. She was attempting to stage an intervention designed to question my mental competency in my own living room. "Advocates?" I asked, remaining perfectly calm while my heart rate spiked. "Advocates for what, exactly?" Ms. Walsh stepped forward with the practiced smile of someone who deals with difficult elderly clients for a living. "Mrs. Henderson, we're here because Julia is concerned about some recent decisions that seem out of character for a loving mother. Cutting off all financial support to your daughter without warning can be a sign of several concerning conditions." I looked at Dr. Stevens, who had the grace to appear uncomfortable with the situation. "And you, doctor? What's your professional opinion about a mother who decides to stop enabling her adult daughter's financial dependency?" "Mrs. Henderson, I haven't conducted a formal assessment, but sudden changes in financial behavior can sometimes indicate that someone has finally opened their eyes," I interrupted, my voice carrying the authority I'd once used to quiet disruptive classrooms. "Please, all of you, sit down. Since you've brought this circus to my home, let's have a complete discussion." Julia positioned herself on my couch like she was holding court, her confidence clearly bolstered by her professional backup. "Mom, we're worried about you. This isn't like you. You've always been supportive of my education and my future. This sudden change in behavior—" "Sudden?" I asked, opening my laptop on the coffee table. "Julia, there's nothing sudden about this. This is the result of 27 years of careful observation and recent enlightening discoveries." I turned my laptop screen toward the three of them, displaying the bank transfer interface I had prepared for this exact moment. "Before we discuss my mental competency, let me show you something that might clarify my current state of mind. Memento Viral 1. The financial revelation. You see this screen?" I asked, pointing to my online banking interface. "This is my investment account with Edward Jones. The current balance, as you can see, is $247,000. Julia's mouth fell open. Ms. Walsh leaned forward, clearly confused about where this was heading. Dr. Stevens began taking notes. "And this," I continued, opening a second account, "is my retirement savings with Vanguard. Current balance, $73,000. I opened a third tab with deliberate precision. This is my money market account with SunTrust Bank. Balance, $52,000. The room had fallen completely silent. Julia was staring at the numbers like they were written in a foreign language. "Total liquid assets," I said, with the same calm tone I'd once used to explain compound interest to students. $372,000. Money I accumulated over 43 years of teaching while appearing to live paycheck to paycheck because I was spending everything on someone who saw my sacrifices as basic parental obligations." Julia's face had gone ash white. But you always said money was tight. You always acted like I was broke?" I finished. "I wasn't broke, Julia. I was broke because of you. Every month, I had to choose between my own financial security and your comfort. I chose your comfort for 27 years. Ms. Walsh was frantically scribbling notes, clearly realizing that her client's narrative about a confused elderly woman was disintegrating in real time. Mrs. Henderson, these assets don't change the fact that your sudden withdrawal of support could indicate... Could indicate what? I asked, my voice sharpening. That I finally overheard my daughter discussing how my death would be the best birthday present she could receive? That I discovered she's been spending my money on luxury items while I've been eating generic food? That I learned she's been researching how to have me declared mentally incompetent? The silence that followed was absolute. Dr. Stevens had stopped writing. Ms. Walsh had closed her notepad. Julia looked like she was going to vomit. You see, I continued, standing up and walking to my mantel where I kept my family photos. I've spent this week doing something I should have done years ago. I've been documenting exactly who my daughter really is when she thinks no one is paying attention. Memento viral 2, the evidence presentation. I returned to the coffee table carrying a manila folder that I placed in front of my uninvited guests. Ms. Walsh, since you're here in a professional capacity, perhaps you'd like to review some evidence before we continue discussing my mental state. I opened the folder to reveal printed screenshots of Julia's social media posts, credit card statements highlighting luxury purchases, and a notarized statement from Mrs. Patterson describing the conversation she'd overheard about incompetency proceedings. This Instagram post, I said, pointing to the champagne celebration photo, shows Julia bragging about her financial freedom funded by parents who understand that supporting dreams means supporting lifestyle. Posted 3 weeks ago while I was skipping my cholesterol medication to ensure her credit card wouldn't be declined. Julia reached for the folder with trembling hands. Mom, you don't understand. Social media isn't real. People exaggerate. And this, I continued, ignoring her interruption, is a credit card statement showing $47,000 in non-essential purchases over the past year. Luxury spas, designer handbags, expensive restaurants, all funded by a woman you privately described as an emotional vampire whose death would solve your financial problems. Dr. Stevens had resumed taking notes, but his expression had completely changed. Mrs. Henderson, may I ask how you obtained some of this information? You may ask, I replied. I obtained it by being a careful observer of someone who was planning to destroy my independence. Someone who saw my generosity as evidence of mental incompetence rather than evidence of unconditional love. Ms. Walsh was clearly trying to salvage a situation that had spiraled beyond her control. Mrs. Henderson, even if Julia has made some poor choices, that doesn't necessarily mean... The sound of my doorbell interrupted her mid-sentence. Through the window, I could see David Morrison approaching with a folder of his own. Perfect timing, I said, opening the door. David, please come in. I believe we discussed the possibility that Julia might attempt something like this. Memento viral. 3. The legal counterattack. David entered with the confident bearing of someone who had spent 30 years practicing elder law. He surveyed the scene. Julia surrounded by her hired advocates, me standing calmly in the center of my own living room, and smiled. Ms. Walsh, he said, clearly recognizing Julia's attorney, I should have known you'd be involved in something like this. How many families have you convinced to pursue questionable competency claims this year? Mr. Morrison, Ms. Walsh replied stiffly, I'm here at the request of a concerned daughter who is trying to have her mother declared mentally incompetent after learning that her 27-year financial dependency has been terminated. David finished. Yes. Mrs. Henderson explained the situation when she retained my services last week. He placed his folder on my coffee table next to mine. Dr. Stevens, I presume you're here to conduct some kind of informal cognitive assessment? I'm afraid that won't be necessary. Mrs. Henderson underwent comprehensive psychiatric and neurological testing yesterday with Dr. Sarah Williams at Emory University Hospital. David opened his folder to reveal official medical documents with the Emory letterhead clearly visible. Dr. Williams found Mrs. Henderson to be cognitively sharp, emotionally stable, and fully competent to make all financial and personal decisions. In fact, her exact words were that Mrs. Henderson shows exceptional clarity of thought and appropriate boundary setting with manipulative family members. Julia's face crumpled like paper in fire. Mom, please. You don't understand. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was just scared and... Scared of what? I asked, my voice gentle but implacable. Scared of having to pay your own bills? Scared of learning to budget? Scared of discovering what you're actually worth when you can't use my money to buy your identity? I sat down across from my daughter, looking directly into eyes that held the same green flecks I'd been studying since she was born. Julia, I raised you to believe that love means never having to face consequences. I raised you to think that family means unlimited financial support without gratitude or reciprocation. I was wrong. Tears were streaming down her face now, but they felt different from the manipulative crying I'd seen so many times before. These tears carried the weight of someone who was finally understanding the scope of what they'd lost. The mother who would have given you anything died the morning I heard you wishing for my death, I continued. But the woman who's going to teach you how to stand on your own feet is very much alive, and she's not going anywhere. I stood up and walked to my front door, opening it wide. Ms. Walsh, Dr. Stevens, thank you for coming. Your services are no longer needed. Julia, you're welcome to visit when you're ready to have a conversation between two adults instead of between a manipulator and her victim. Ms. Walsh gathered her papers with professional efficiency, clearly recognizing a lost cause. Dr. Stevens paused at the door, his expression thoughtful. Mrs. Henderson, for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Tough love is still love. Julia remained on my couch, crying in a way I hadn't seen since she was small. But I didn't move to comfort her. Comfort was what had created this situation. What she needed now was something much more valuable and much more difficult to provide: the space to discover her own strength. Julia, I said softly, I love you enough to let you fall. And I love you enough to believe you'll learn to fly. 18 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my Atlanta home, preparing Sunday dinner for guests who actually wanted to be there. The woman looking back at me from the reflection in my new stainless steel appliances bore little resemblance to the anxious, constantly worried mother who had once burned coffee while eavesdropping on her daughter's cruel conversations. My hair, now cut in a stylish silver bob instead of the practical ponytail I'd worn for decades, caught the afternoon light streaming through windows I'd had professionally cleaned for the first time in years. The navy blue dress I wore was new, actually new, not new to me from a thrift store, and it fit properly because I'd finally allowed myself to shop for clothes that made me feel confident instead of invisible. But the most dramatic change wasn't visible in any mirror. It was the lightness in my chest, the absence of the constant anxiety that had lived there for 27 years, the fear of disappointing Julia, of not doing enough, of failing as a mother. All of it had been replaced by something I'd forgotten existed: peace. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Margaret Chen, my accountant who had become a dear friend, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing a smile that reached her eyes. Behind her stood 3 other women from our volunteer group at the Atlanta Community Food Bank: Sarah, a retired nurse; Patricia, a former corporate executive; and Diana, a widow like myself who had discovered her own strength after decades of putting everyone else first. Lucia, Margaret said, embracing me warmly. How was your week at the Literacy Center? Incredible, I replied, leading them to my dining room where the table was set with china I'd kept boxed for special occasions that never seemed to arrive when my life revolved around Julia's schedule. I'm working with a young mother named Carmen, who's learning to read so she can help her children with homework. Yesterday, she read her first complete chapter book. The pride in my voice was genuine and uncomplicated. For the first time in decades, my sense of accomplishment came from my own achievements rather than from enabling someone else's success. The 50 hours a month I spent teaching adult literacy felt more meaningful than all the tuition payments I'd ever made. Sarah poured wine while Patricia arranged the flowers she'd brought from her garden. Speaking of reading, Patricia said with a mischievous grin, did you see the article about your story in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution? I had seen it. The journalist, a woman named Rebecca Torres, had contacted me after hearing about my situation through a friend who worked at the food bank. The article, titled Teaching Tough Love, When Saying No Becomes an Act of Love, had generated hundreds of responses from parents dealing with similar situations. "I've received 47 letters this month," I told my friends as we settled around the table. Mothers and fathers who recognized their own stories in mine. People who realized they'd been enabling adult children instead of empowering them. Diana raised her glass in a toast. "To Lucia, who proved it's never too late to reclaim your life." As we clinked glasses, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The first months after cutting off Julia's support had been difficult in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not because I regretted my decision, but because I had to learn how to fill the space that constant worry about Julia had occupied in my mind. That space was now filled with activities that brought me joy instead of stress. Tuesday evenings teaching reading. Thursday afternoons working in the community garden I'd helped establish in a local park. Saturday mornings volunteering at the animal shelter, where I'd fallen in love with a rescue dog named Buddy, who was currently napping on his bed in my kitchen. "How is Julia doing?" Margaret asked gently, knowing this was always a complex topic for me. I smiled, and it was genuine rather than forced. "She's working as a medical scribe at Grady Hospital while finishing her last year of medical school on a partial scholarship. She has 2 roommates in a modest apartment in Virginia Highland. She drives a used Honda Civic that she bought herself. And last month, she called to thank me." The phone call had been awkward but meaningful. Julia's voice had carried a maturity I'd never heard before as she explained how the past year had taught her things about herself that she'd never learned during her decades of financial comfort. "I hated you for the first 6 months," she had admitted. "I kept expecting you to change your mind, to feel guilty and rescue me like you always had. When I realized that wasn't going to happen, I had to figure out who I was without your money to define me." The process hadn't been easy for her. Julia had been forced to withdraw from school for 1 semester to work full-time and save money for tuition. She'd lived in a studio apartment with no air conditioning and furniture from Goodwill. She'd learned to cook, to budget, to negotiate with landlords and utility companies. "But Mom," she had continued, "I'm proud of myself in a way I never was before. When I graduate next spring, I'll know I earned it. When I get my first job as a doctor, I'll know I'm capable of taking care of myself. You gave me something more valuable than money. You gave me confidence in my own abilities." That conversation had been worth every difficult moment of the past 18 months. "She's invited me to her graduation ceremony," I told my friends. "Not because she needs me to pay for anything, but because she wants to share her accomplishment with me." The afternoon passed in comfortable conversation about our volunteer work, upcoming travel plans, and books we were reading. When my friends left that evening, I sat in my living room with Buddy curled up beside me, watching the sunset paint my walls gold. My phone buzzed with a text from Julia. "Mom, I got the residency I wanted at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. I start in July. Want to celebrate with dinner this weekend? My treat." I typed back, "I'm proud of you. And yes, I'd love to celebrate with you." As I prepared for bed in my peaceful house, I reflected on something Dr. Williams had said during my psychiatric evaluation. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is refuse to rescue their child from the consequences of their choices. For 27 years, I had believed that love meant sacrifice without limit. I had believed that being a good mother meant ensuring my daughter never felt uncomfortable, never struggled, never had to question whether she was capable of handling challenges on her own. I was wrong about all of it. Love isn't writing checks to solve problems. Love is believing someone is strong enough to solve their own problems. Love isn't eliminating obstacles. Love is teaching someone they have the tools to overcome obstacles. Love isn't saying yes to every request. Love is knowing when to say no so that yes becomes meaningful again. The best gift I ever gave my daughter wasn't tuition money or rent payments or luxury purchases. The best gift was learning to stop giving gifts that weren't actually gifts at all, but crutches that prevented her from discovering her own strength. Family, I learned, isn't about who depends on you. It's about who grows alongside you. And sometimes, the most profound act of love is stepping back and allowing someone you love to become who they were always meant to be. As I turned off the lights, I smiled thinking about dinner with Julia next weekend. For the first time in our relationship, We would be meeting as two independent adults who chose to spend time together rather than as a provider and dependent bound by financial obligation. That, I realized, was what I had always wanted but had been too afraid to allow. Love without transaction. Relationship without rescue. Family built on choice rather than necessity. The mother who had been dying to give her daughter everything was gone. The woman who had learned to give her daughter something better, herself, was finally completely home.